broadcast?
I don't know.
Is Karen going to bring us the chocolate milk? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, or like I bring, it would be better that we not do stuff.
That's a good.
Because it
Yeah.
could be impossible.
Yeah.
If you put it in the fridge for 2 days, it's good. It's
She can bring us milk.
We're just waiting on.
Just so everybody's clear, we started the live stream.
Yep.
And the-
I'm just waiting for 3 board members who are in the room, so we are ready to go.
we're trying to keep it. We're trying to stay at 10 people.
You want me to go out there?
Do I just, Martin, should I step out?
No, you're okay.
Yeah, I can street. If it's already done, I can just.
6, 7, 8, 10.
Now, what's the thing with 10?
10 is the governor's. When you're in a high risk area. We're.
How are you?
It turns out, we learned this morning, that because we're a structured, how did he say that? We're kind of a supervised activity. We could have more than 10, but I didn't learn that till.
All right, we are going to go ahead and get started. It's a little bit late. We're at 5:03. Today is Tuesday, October 20th, 2020. Let's start by indicating who's here with Todd.
Todd Zinger.
No, it's on.
Terry Bodden.
Martin Bates, superintendent.
Chris Wynn.
Nicole McDermott.
Connie, yell your name.
Connie Anderson.
And then Connie Burgess, you want to indicate you're here?
Connie Burgess is online.
All right, thank you, Connie, and Karen Winder, board chair. Welcome, everyone. We have very few in attendance. That's intentional today. But we welcome everyone online, and glad you could join us this evening. We're going to go ahead and start out with our bond sale report given by Dave Garrett.
Thank you, board members. I need to introduce to you again Dale Okerlund. He's our financial advisor. We have had a very successful completion of the bond sale on October 7th. Dale's here to give you a summary and the detailed information on how that sale went. I think the booklets have been handed out, so they should be in front of you.
Good evening. As Dave said, the sale of the bonds was completed via an electronic competitive bidding process on the 7th. You'll see the details of the results on that in a couple of minutes. For context, this is the final block of the bonds authorized in your last election. There are no more bonds authorized for sale. So this is the completion of that process.
You talk into that one loud.
Do I need to talk in here?
Yeah, that's better.
Thank you.
Okay, I can take this off if you can't hear me.
That'd even be better.
Okay. So in the big picture of the capital plan, this completes the bond issuance process, and that leaves it to the board to complete the remaining part of the capital plan next year by replacing the drop-off in debt service that will occur next year with a capital levy. So there will be a shift in the tax next year to complete that plan. Technically, under the Truth in Taxation law, that's a tax increase because the bond levy is not included in the certified tax rate. So even though there is no tax increase, you will have to advertise it as one. And I think you're well aware of that. So that's context. The specifics of the bond sale, if you look at page 2 of the book, you can see there in historic terms from the 10-year Treasury Index that we are at an astonishingly low point in the history of interest rates over the last decade. In fact, we're aside from last August, we're about at the low. There is another look at that on the tax exempt bond side on page 3. Also with a decade of history, you can see there that we're also near the very bottom of that 10-year period in terms of interest rates. On page 4, you can see a little bit of an historical run. That orange line is what it was a year prior to the sale. The green line is the yield curve as it occurred at the date of the sale. And there's some other dates scattered in there should you wish to have market references. I'm going to skip pages 5 and 6. They're relatively technical summaries of what was going on in the market on the 7th. The chief thing is that there was a lot of supply, but for that, we would have had more bidders, I think. In retrospect, I don't think that constrained your ultimate result at all because of your credit quality. The ratings reports are shown on page 7. The underlying ratings are on the top row. Those are the ratings you have without the state guarantee, just as yourselves. AA1 Moody's, which is one notch below the apex, and Fitch AAA, which is at the apex. And then, of course, with the state guarantee, you have a AAA overlay on that. So your bonds are, the way I put it sometimes is, it's pretty hard to find paper in the United States better than this. So if you're an investor in terms of credit quality. On page 8 is a summary of the 7 bids received. You can see that with the exception of the final bid, which was a bit of an outlier, we had a bottom feeder there. They're pretty tight in the top 3. And the winning TIC was just under 0.76 hundredths of a percent, or that is 76 hundredths of a percent. Or as we say in the business, 75 basis points. On page 9, you can see all the bids. They were identical except for the price offered. That is, all of them bid 5 coupons top to bottom, which I kind of expected, and that's what we got. So the difference was in the price offered, and the best bid offered the highest price at that structure. We'll get into that a little more in just a moment. If you want to look at then the historical summary of your bond issues since 2010, before then you were out of debt, so we don't have any prior history to that. You can see the average life, the TIC, this shows you, the TIC is a weighted average of the bonds all along the yield curve that you're selling that tell you the overall interest cost in percentage terms of what you're doing. And you can see that even though compared to the 2018 bonds, which had an average life of 1.5 years and a TIC of basically 2.25%, this year we had a longer average life and a much lower interest rate. And that was a low interest rate. So it is kind of an extraordinary thing. In dollar terms, the par amount of the bonds is $88 million. The original issue premium is just under 14. That's because they all bid 5 coupons, and the yields are much lower than that, so they had to pay up for the bonds. So your net is just under 102 million, and your transaction costs are significantly under 1% in the aggregate. They're using the method of sale. We do not control the underwriter's spread. They control that entirely. But that's what that is. And those terms are all explained on those pages if you care read them. That's the overall summary before I get to the repayment. Does anyone have questions about the sale process or result before I get into the summary of the repayment schedule? Then looking into the actual finance numbers, you can see that sources and uses replicated. The debt service repayment, and this comes back to what I was talking about at the beginning. If you look on page 2, under Appendix A, you can see the repayment schedule is over 10 years, but more than 36 million of the 88 million are being repaid next June. So there, with what we've done in prior years, there is a significant drop-off of debt service next year, which is what leaves that hole that needs to be filled in with the capital levy. So you can see in sort of quantitative terms what's being done there structurally. And this is all according to the plan that was developed prior to the election. That is not the details, but the big picture of that plan. On page 3, you can see the pricing summary, which show you the dollar prices of the yields are your actual borrowing cost. That is the return to the investor. And the dollar price is how you get the difference between the coupon into the price, which is what produced the premium. So that's what we needed to do to get you the lowest cost of funds. Finally, if I can have you look at Appendix B, we have there the Moody's Investor Service credit opinion, which you may wish to review. I will just mention a couple of highlights. You can see on the first page there, they identify as credit strengths your extremely large tax base in a significant metropolitan area and your strong financial profile, including reserve levels and cash liquidity. Only one of those factors is in your control, but that one contributes substantially to your high credit rating. Credit challenges, you have a demographic with below average wealth measures on a district-wide average, also entirely beyond your control, and a trend of declining enrollment, which may or may not be beyond your control. Those are concerns they have. I've mentioned before to your staff that Moody's, somewhat irrationally to my mind, really doesn't like declining enrollment. I'm not quite sure what that has to do with you repaying your bonds, but they don't like it. I've complained to them and they don't care. So that's that. Then if you go forward to the Fitch discussion, which I generally think Fitch has a little more clear communicative write-up. You've got the rating drivers there. Rating sensitivities on page 1 of their report. Factors that could individually or collectively lead to a negative rating action or a downgrade. General fund revenue growth that continues to slow, remaining persistently below inflation. They have a concern that your general fund isn't growing as fast as inflation is. The other one is if you were to have an unsolved structural gap caused by rising personnel costs outpacing general fund revenue growth. So structural balance, that is income equaling outgo, is really important to that. And then a return to economic contraction, coronavirus things or so on. And of course, they didn't discuss what could make your credit go up because you're at the top of their rating. We will hope to maintain that rating for the life of your debt. Bondholders don't like it when their holdings get downgraded because it hurts the value. But that's a concern and not entirely within your control that you need to be aware of. Are there any questions either about the big picture plan or the details of the bond sale or the credit rating? Because if there are not, that concludes the presentation.
Thanks much.
Thank you very much, and congratulations on a remarkable execution of the plan that was developed leading up to the election thus far.
And thanks, Dale, to you and your team. I can attest after I was on the call when this bond was sold, and it goes really fast. And I can assure you that we have a team that knows what they're doing, and they're specialists in their field, and we're grateful to be partners with you to work on these bonds. So thanks. If you'll take that back to your whole team, that would be great.
I will. Thank you very much. We definitely and thoroughly appreciate the relationship. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks,
Karen,
Dale.
just for interest, the actual closing of the bonds will be this Thursday morning. So that
Okay.
in about 5 minutes, a phone call with all the cash, $100 million is transferred to our bank. That will
Awesome.
conclude.
Thanks, Dave. Okay, next, I had a constituent email me and saying that there was a discrepancy on our distance days with how many A days were distance learning and how many B days. And that got us looking a little bit closer to it, and there was actually a discrepancy. So John Welburn's going to do our presentation addressing that concern this evening.
Just this middle one?
Okay, good evening, Board of Education. So we took a look at the calendar, and well, let's go ahead and go to the first slide. Go ahead to the next one. We'll just see if this works. Right there. Okay, so that's our current AB calendar for the year, and when we designated Fridays, or pretty much we decided the last day that we were in during the week as distance learning day. So sometimes, most of the time that falls on a Friday, but sometimes it may fall on a different day if we're out early that week. It's correct that in looking at that more closely, you can see that, and I think this thing works. Yeah, right here, right down here at the bottom, you can tell by quarter how many A days fall on a distance learning day and how many B days do. So if you look at the first quarter and the fourth quarter, they pretty much offset one another. So we didn't really want to look at making any changes to the first quarter or to the fourth quarter, but the second quarter and the third quarter are the ones that are problematic. So if you look at second quarter, we have 4 A days and 6 B days. So with a slight change, we'll go ahead and that just highlights the discrepancy by quarter. So taking a look at second quarter, what we propose doing is this is the current calendar right here. And what we'd like to do is just flip these 2 days. So the 23rd and the 24th, making the 24th the distance learning day, an A day, which would then balance second quarter, the number of A and B days that we have. Okay. So that's the proposed change for second quarter. Third quarter is a little more complicated because it was a little more out of whack. So currently, in third quarter, if you look at the month of February, this second week, the 8th through the 11th, what it ends up being is on Friday, the 5th is a B, then you have a B, then you have a B. So 3 straight B days as distance learning days, and then an A day. If we take this second week and we flip it and start with a B day, go BA, BA, then that second week ends on an A day for distance learning day. So it makes it balanced here to BA, BA. And because we've done that changes one of our problems. But then if we go further and do the same thing, so this is earlier in the quarter, but if we go the end of the quarter and third quarter, and we do the same thing the last week of the term, and we flip it. The nice thing that does for us is it also makes March go BA, BA instead of BA, BB. So it balances out the days there. The nice thing about doing this on a week that has 4 days is when you flip it, you don't mess up the total number of A and B days that you have. If you do that on a week that has 5 days, then you just messed up the total number of A and B days that you have. Okay, so that's our proposed change for third quarter. Looking at that, if we do make these 2 adjustments, you'll notice that it equals out the second quarter and the third quarter, which would give us the total number being the same for both A and B days, 19 each. So that's the proposed changes that we make. Do you have any questions or comments for me?
I have a question, a couple questions. Does that, so I know looking at that with the 4 days, does that keep the regular in class, that keeps those even as well, right?
Does it keep the number of face-to-face classes the same? Yes.
Okay, so all of those are balanced out still. And then I'm just curious, are teachers exclusively like on those it's A distance learning only this week? Are they exclusively just dealing with A kids? Are you finding that as you're talking to people, or are they dealing with both A and B those days anyway?
The answer to that is yes, meaning that we have both happening. We have some teachers that are exclusively doing what is done on that day, and we have some that are trying to meet the needs of both. So it kind of varies. We didn't really mandate how they did that. It kind of depends on how they deliver their online instruction and how that works out, whether it's synchronous or asynchronous, so forth. So
My only question is, how are we communicating out to families, students, faculty that, I mean, looking at it on paper, it seems really simple, and I think you've come up with a great solution to balance these days. I just know that for my own kids, I mean, they're so in the set routine of, okay, if Friday was A day, then Monday's B day. I just want to make sure the communication piece is out there. So, because we do have some high schoolers that are doing A in person and B online. They need to know what days to actually show up. And when we have 2B days back to back, I just want to make sure
absolutely. So we would plan to
of.
communicate this in a variety of ways. One, we would communicate it through our communications department. We'd put it on our website, and so we'd update the calendar on the website. But we'd also have every school, all the secondary schools. We shared this with the principals in their admin meeting this past week, and they plan to send it out to all of their patrons, both the distance learning students and the face-to-face students. And then just prior to those changes, not only will there be announcements made and so forth and so on, and not only will it run on their marquees, but they'll also send something out on Blackboard so there's another reminder that the changes, because we have students that will walk in on any given day and forget if it's an A day or a B day. So we have to constantly message it.
Teachers will put A and B by the door.
Yes. Yep.
Or I know some schools do the color of lights.
Yep, they'll do
one
it
or
right on the
other.
front door and the entranceway. They'll do it in the main office, but teachers do it a lot too. They'll remind students. So we're asking our faculties to also message that out, because they can, at the end of the day, on the last day before we go back to the flip it, they can remind them as well. So we're going to message it numerous ways to get the word out, especially since it is a unique change. We don't do this every year. Usually we set the calendar and it stays set.
Well, I'm picturing the little magnets. Do you guys know what I'm talking about? That, they're on my little whiteboard at home. And so is there a way to update those, or is that ship sailed?
No, the hard part with those is those are ordered in months in advance.
Okay.
And so we're just going to ask to get the message out, and then hopefully
People
parents
can go and
make that
Sharpie
change.
Sharpie
If you wanna
it in
use a
their own
Sharp-
calendar.
Oh, yeah. In fact, make a Sharpie and
Okay.
make the
I was
changes.
just
You
curious
bet.
if that was possible or not.
Yep.
That was my only question. Any other
Okay.
questions, board members?
My only question was, since we added the 2 extra days in this week, are we looking at any of that during the rest of the school year? That is our calendar going to shift at all because of that? Because of the
I
change?
think you're referring to the professional development days?
Yeah.
Yeah,
This week, we've added.
Like what we're doing this week, because we added those in. Is that even on the table for other quarters
The-
so that we're not changing something again in the year?
No, that's
Okay.
not on the table right
Okay.
now. The State Board of Education with their 180, 990 requirement, they adjusted typically we can have 3 days, so the 180 ratcheted down to 177 days of instruction. Because of this COVID year, they've said more than 3 days we could have 2 days, 10 days rather, for professional development and so on. We're using 2 of those. We had already been using some of the others, and we're also going to use several of those to make up for the wind days and the emergency closure days. And so that source of non-instructional days, still counting towards 180, is pretty much tapped out.
Okay.
The nice thing for those PD days for the schools that had the closures because of the wind, though, it doesn't impact students. It just impacts our teachers. And that we're trying to work out at every site because there are only certain sites that were impacted. So that's not something that we'll have to incorporate into the calendar. It's a great question, though.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
Thanks, John.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Board members, as Dale alluded a moment ago, Don, you on your way? There's Don. Dale alluded a moment ago about the long-range capital outlay plan, and that involving a shift from debt service, which is what we use to pay off bonds, to capital, which is what we use to build and maintain, not maintain, build and upgrade our buildings. And that will involve a tax increase really every year. When I say tax increase, it's not an increase of taxes. It's a shift of levy from debt service to capital, which under the law, even though the taxpayer isn't affected by that, under the law, that's a technical tax increase, and so we'll need to hold truth and taxation hearings. We thought it would be helpful, given a number of things that we've been talking about, things that we've had happen the last bit, to bring the board back up to speed in anticipation of that, which is really going to be coming. We're going to start taking steps in that direction over the next 3, 4, 5 months in anticipation of a tax hearing in June. So we laid this out. Karen and Connie and I talked about the best way to bring us back up to speed, and we thought we would start tonight by talking about the bond rollout and where cost increases and things like that have been hitting us. And so we've asked Don to take that on and spend some time with that.
Yeah, that's a perfect summary, almost the entire presentation. But if we could pull that slide deck up, Brandon, that would be great. Thank you. The first few slides, I think it's helpful to go back in recent history just so we understand our current financial setting. So way back in 2018, we had a lot of projections, and we were talking about costs of schools, costs of bonding, and how to roll these out. And we developed what we call the Phase 1 and Phase 2 capital plan rollout. And the initial bonding process, as well as the subsequent transfer of debt service to capital that the superintendent just spoke of, was taken to the general public. Ben and I were out constantly and covered every network, many of the individual schools, et cetera.
I was trying to forget. Thank you for reminding me.
You're welcome. And so during that process, it was part talking about the bond, part talking a listening tour, if you will. And one of the items that they spoke of was, hey, listen, we like your concept of a bond and a transition to capital, and then try and do as much pay as you go as you can. And so when we looked in our crystal ball, we said, hey, this is where we're at. And of course, you'll see that we now reflect the actual cost for projects built. Walker, South Kearns, Hunter, some of the remodels, the 2 existing junior high remodels of Evergreen and Valley, et cetera. And then as the reminder, in 2019, just a year ago, We had conversations about budget caps for Skyline and Cypress based upon where we were headed in design and our best indications of what those target budgets would be given cost escalations. So again, as that reminder, we started way back in 2017 speaking to costs. We had thought we had nailed down some pretty conservative cost estimates on facilities. That being said, the escalations that occurred between 17 and 2020 have confounded us all. So we're really seeing a 10% annual increase. And so that is compounded. Remember, you raise it 10% one year, that increases now another 10%, another 10%. So the challenge really is, again, what's the forecast? The forecast from 2021 and beyond is still 6 or 7%. In the Utah market, it's still moving rapidly. We don't believe that we'll follow any national trends where construction costs will see some easing over the next couple of years. And so our challenge purely is to try and hold those construction costs to budget. Most importantly, between now and 2025. Go ahead, Nicole. Yes.
Sorry, is that just because we have so much construction currently underway as far as the airport, et cetera? Why do you feel like we're not going to see that downward trend?
Yeah, we just don't see any signs of a slowing economy. Our natural growth pattern in state, our high birth rates and things of that nature don't show any signs of slowing. And so the construction industry that's out there now is just trying to keep its head above water and keep up with any project, be it home construction, be it retail growth, office growth. Then you do talk about those bigger projects. You do have the airport, you do have the prison, you do still have some substantial projects out there. And so you combine that with what we'll call a declining labor force in construction. The average age of a plumber or an electrician, they're not spring chickens. And so, that's giving us a labor pinch. And so that helps contribute to the cost increases as well. And then we're not seeing any material costs decreasing. Some people have said, well, we don't know, let's see. Others have said, well, trust me, because of COVID production slowdowns, because they're working at greater distances, et cetera, your material costs aren't going to go down for the foreseeable future either.
And Don, the materials did their 45 to whatever % jump in 2017, 2018 when the tariffs went into place.
Yes.
Largely steel, and in this earthquake prone area, which we're more sensitively attuned to today than we were when we were putting these budgets together, there's a lot more steel that goes into buildings than ever before. And so that was a big leapfrog in terms of materials, of the cost of materials.
Absolutely.
And then the labor force with COVID and other things has remained tight.
And if we think it wasn't just steel, it's anything that's metal. So in our buildings, it's reinforcement and concrete, it's steel beams, it's copper, electrical wiring, it's all of our HVAC components. There's a lot of metal in a school facility. And so we captured as much of those material costs as possible, and then they're playing out that labor market. All right, so that's our challenge. And again, you'll hear us reference, boy, we're really nervous until 2025. And that's purely because of the high schools, right? These are big, costly projects, sometimes referred to as the pig and the python, right? I mean, you have to save up a lot, you have to bond a lot to construct a couple of high schools. Then after that, it's a little easier on your cash flow management. But just to get over that big hurdle of 2 high schools, that's really where we're careful. And those conclude and pay out in 2025. So let us take a look now at our little summary flow charts here. So we list generically our elementaries, junior highs, and high schools, and the year that we began construction / began design, all right? And so there's some bleed over here as we look at, oh, well, when are you going to start it? Well, we'll start it in 2020. Well, that starts with the design, then bidding, then construction. So it's not 1 year and it's done. We also list out our bond revenue. We incorporate the bond premium Then we look at our capital fund for its revenues, and that leads to that bottom line of total revenue. And you'll really see that as we go to the following pages of 2 and 3, that capital revenue line takes over. Once we've gotten our bonds, once we've started to pay those, and then once we've paid off that bond premium, you'll see a very sharp escalation in the capital revenue. And again, that's because each year we take some debt service levy out and we put it in that capital fund. And that's the pay-as-you-go that our public really thought was the best path forward. Now, the most important line at the end of the day is the bottom line that says cash flow, and that has to remain positive. And so sometimes you'll see our cash flow build up because we're saving up for a pretty good expenditure. So you'll see that play out. So we've incorporated 2018 through 2020 actuals, okay? And so you're starting to see some of our costs come in. We've built some elementary schools, we've remodeled, we've put an addition to Hunter, and we've started to pay out on the first phases of the Skyline project. Then we get into 2021. That's dominated by Skyline costs and Cypress costs, Cypress land and Cypress kind of footings, foundations, and some structural steel. And you'll notice that we're carrying in that bottom line a really healthy cash flow. That's just because we're holding back, because as we get into the next page and we're looking at 2023 through 2025, you start to see some very significant output into those two high schools.
Don, go back. It's too bad that 2022 and 2023 aren't on the same page. But let me see if I'm getting this right. So at 2021, we're spending, 2021 hadn't happened yet. We're going to spend about $64 million, but we're bringing in about 101, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's not that we have 37 million extra dollars, because we're banking those $37 million to spend next year. So because next year we're going to spend, when I say next year in 22, $74 million on high school, but we're only bringing in $34 million.
That's right.
So and then when you switch that over to the next slide, so in 2023 we're going to spend another $73 million, but we're only bringing in $36 million. So that's what you mean by cash flow.
That's right. This is Don and Mitch doing their darndest to make sure that we don't overexpend, right? So we have in essence, we have an okay cash flow, but a healthy savings account that we rely upon to carry us really through the early 2020s.
So go back one more time.
Mm-hmm.
So the premium that Dale was just so excited about telling us about, that's $13.5 million there.
Yeah. Realized in 2021.
That's income in 2021, but we're anticipating spending that in 2 and 3 to finish our high school.
It's very valuable to our savings account cash flow, and you'll see that really play out in 2024. This is as close as we get in the entire process to a zero out. As a matter of fact, we're eyeing it carefully, because as you see that 2024 expenditure, Cypress High School finishes out, 2025 Skyline's most of the way done, but a little money out there. We're going to be watching every penny as we come into that. And so we've asked the contractors that are working with us to give us their best cash flow management process that they can. And we're very nervous of that $2 million cushion in a large capital plan. In our mind, that's a zero, right? I mean, I just look at it as I've got to hold the line on cash as much as possible.
Don, hang on just a second.
Mm-hmm.
This isn't a kumbaya thing, but let's everybody take just a minute and think through what Don just said. Does this make sense? Because we talk a lot about cash flow, and I think what we just talked through is the crucial point. Now, after 2025, revenue starts to exceed planned expenditures,
mm-hmm.
and that's when we start to catch up on the projects that we're
That's
that have been
right,
pushed
that's
out.
right, yeah.
So everybody, board members, does this make sense that we just described or ask Don to answer any questions here about how this looks?
And again, what we're trying to do is hold as close as possible to the order in which the bond was communicated to the public. That's very important. We're trying to keep our word as closely as possible. Yes.
Pull your mic down, Connie.
How do the school closures affect what we're doing?
Sure. The school.
They have to have some effect monetarily, don't they?
They do in the latter phases. Let's call it phase 2, that 15 and 20 years out. And we have a couple of slides that I can help articulate that a little bit longer. But again, the closures that you've seen weren't in really phase 1 operations. And so that's not helping us in today cash flow. It will help us in future cash flows. So then as we march on, you see that we're starting to build those reserves. And so West Kearns is supposed to be rebuilt. Then we have Taylorsville High's addition to be rebuilt. And you notice we're keeping expenditures going and we have some additional revenue. You're going to say, well, why don't we go spend that additional $20 million at the bottom of the cash flow line? Well, that goes into phase 3 because I'm saving up for the next item. So you see, I'll drop down to 15, then I'll save up because I'm saving for junior highs and things of that nature that we've said we're going to build.
And did you see what just happened between page 2 and page 3?
Right.
On capital revenue. So capital revenue been pretty stable in that high 30s. And then
We
all of a
don't
sudden-
hear his mic.
You got to get closer to your
Oh,
mic.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. As you look
Thank you.
from page 2 to page 3, the capital revenue starting in about 2028 starts to really grow. That's that yellow highlighted line. And that means that our debt has all been paid off at that point. And as we've shifted because the debt service we're going to shift to capital right now is relatively small.
Mhm.
Then when the bonds are all paid off, which happens about out there, then this really starts to grow as we shift it. And that's the driver for the pay-as-you-go program. But that really starts kicking in here at the beginning of page 3.
And what's a very interesting note is that we have the bond that you sold this month. That's paying out quite rapidly. We're still working on a 20-year bond from 2012. And that pays off in 2032. So the last column, you suddenly notice, oh, hey, we're getting 40, 50, 72. That's when all those prior debts are paid off. We'll have paid off this current issuance before we pay off the old 2012.
There'll be a great temptation in 2032 to not move all of that over. And for for the 2 or 3 of you who will be there at that point, 4, Ben will be there too. 11 years go really quickly, but in 2032, that's when you'll need to be having these presentations again to determine phase 2, how true you want to stay to phase 2. Now, clearly, given the communication to the public about how this was going to go, which encouraged people to vote for the bond, board members will feel that pressure from that commitment. There will be board members who made that commitment 4 or 5 years ago who aren't here anymore and aren't going to feel that pressure. But that's in the late 2020s and the early 2030s, there will need to be a lot of conversations here on the board about that long-range capital plan and to what degree you're going to stay true to that plan that you promoted to the public in 2016 and 17?
Yeah, really 2017 was the big outreach. Mm-hmm.
Can I ask a clarifying question?
Hmm?
Going back to what you said, Connie asked the question about the schools that have been closed. Just to clarify, to make sure we all understand, the money that we save, not just on like the future rebuild or the future remodel, but what about, there is some capital, isn't there, that we're saving every year, and where is that going into?
That's your M&O savings. There's really very little capital savings from a closure.
Okay, so is that just going back into the general?
Correct. It's going back into the general fund. That is correct. Mhm. And so this is, Connie, the beginning of the slide that helps you look into phase one forecasting. So again, because of cost increases and how those construction cost increases impair your cash flow, this is the current best thinking of our model on when these schools can come online. And again, we've always been speaking for the last 14 months or so about that 5 to 7 year delay, depending upon where the project was originally slated. And some of these, the slide, again, is all about that cash flow. If you have to save for it a couple of years, you'll see it just bounces a little bit because you're now in a pay-as-you-go framework. And so this, I think, helps to encapsulate it. And then again, the graph, the graphic here is just really showing what that remodel and rebuild slide looks like when you put it out in a calendar event. And so you're seeing those projects, everything's kind of post-high school, pushes out a bit.
But that's only if we do nothing. Like, if we just let the bonds play out. If we just let the bonds play out like we have it right now, right?
If we stay true to the original scheduling of the schools, this is what those schools would look like. Now, again, the bonding, because you're, I'm going to see if I'm getting your question right. Because of the two high school costs, we're pretty much frozen through 2025. We have to commit all of those bond dollars through 2025. And then once you get into that 26 time frame, and I'll zip back to that page, you'll see we're starting to get some capital in. And again, we've represented here what was on the original bond rollout. And then again, that goes into this page 3, where it's the continuation of bringing, Arcadia, Orchard, Kearns Jr., et cetera, online with those other remodels. So again, we're doing our darndest in cash flow management to stay at the information that was given to the voters at the time of the bond. And when we've had schools make inquiries, hey, can you tell us what's been impacted? We talk them through the construction cost escalations, et cetera. Now, they are not happy to hear that they've been delayed. They understand the reasoning. They get it. I think they kind of get the, okay, we understand the logic. There's no bartering and trading or underhand deals here. Just keep us updated on how construction costs and cash flow are occurring. And so as part of that, that's a great reason for us to have this annual discussion, reminding us of where bonds are at, reminding us where finances are at related to capital improvement.
And I guess I'm just saying kind of maybe what Martin was talking about, that we do have some options as some of these bonds expire that we can, we're going to have some talks about that, right?
Yes.
But right now this is just if we stay the course, right? Correct?
Right. And again, you start to see great freedoms in 2032 and beyond. You have some discussion flexibility 2025, 2026, but you're really, because of those two high schools and that constriction that we're dealing with, we're set on our course. And our job now is really cost containment, being very, very conscious about cost.
The cash we're bringing in month to month, year to year, like our budgets
Right.
do, the cash we're bringing in is being spent on those two big expenses.
Yep.
Once those expenses are off, are paid for, then the cash we're bringing in starts looking like a lot more money. And that's where that kicks in.
Right. And again, 2024 is our challenged year. And then after that, things do work better. And frankly, we always knew this. Anytime you put together a bond project that includes two high schools, it was experienced by the district with Granger and Olympus.
That's why we did the bond at all instead of going straight pay as you go.
Yeah.
Because we could never save enough money at the outset to build 2 high schools at the same time.
That's right.
And that's why we,
Yeah.
that's why we
Great
did it the way
lessons
we-
learned from.
The bond is a kickstart to the pay-as-you-go program, and we debated that. This is actually a good model. We debated that at length with some of your predecessors.
And
so-
Dale and others, we would model it. So one of the reasons why the 2012 issue was a 20-year bond versus our much tighter bond payment now, we realized greater capital, and we felt like we could pay out quickly and get to the pay-as-you-go model, and it would be better for the district to make those very large annualized bond repayments, especially since, the high schools are done. We're going to power pay this out. So, any questions really as it relates to the bond rollout, to where we're at, to what our best future predictions are? And unfortunately, every time I see bids come in, anytime I read articles in the construction trade industry, boy, my crystal ball just seems to get cloudier and cloudier, because there's no wonderful news about the district buying power, because there's another big government project or another big announcement where all the construction crews seem to disappear to. Now, we did want to take some time today. Oh, you want to go back? Mm-hmm.
Questions about this? Does it make sense?
I think my only question is, the schools that are on the rebuild or remodel, I guess the rebuild, are we going to have to put money into them to get them sustainable for this many 10 years? Are they pretty?
The 5 to 7 year delay based upon our ability to make repairs and kind of the standard maintenance side of it, we'll get them there. Does it mean that it's the easiest thing to do? No, it's not. But we have had historically a lot of old buildings, and we have a very good maintenance and construction group, and they work as hard as they can to keep those buildings going. For example, this year we've looked out and we've said, oh, here's 5 sets of schools that are going to need some air conditioning upgrades. They certainly won't last much longer. We make that out of our capital pool. We invest in that to extend their life. So we're watching very carefully the condition of the schools. Shall we progress? Are we ready to go to Westlake?
Yep.
Okay, so we had a little bit of a discussion about the unforeseen event, the earthquake, and yes, we are now keenly aware of how seismic events impact buildings. Our district's been a recent topic of study and discussion by many school districts in the state and by many engineers, and it's a good thing to study, and it's a great thing that nobody was hurt. So this is one of those great opportunities to learn. Now, we had talked about rehabilitation versus rebuild. And of course, we're still continuing with our ongoing insurance negotiations, and things are very professional. Both sides are taking their time, articulating, trying to understand others' issues and concerns. We spoke to last week our best thoughts on what a junior high could cost. So if you were to go out and build a junior high today, you're $50 or $55 million if you're rebuilding on the same site. So we have some models for that. West Jordan Junior High is very recent. We've done some analysis on how to equalize the cost of some new builds in Davis, taking out their land acquisition cost and some of those things to try and normalize the costs. And of course, we have an older version, which is Hillcrest High in Murray. And we've tried to do some cost inflation on that. Yes, Hillcrest Junior in Murray, Chris, thank you. That one's old enough that we don't have a lot of confidence in our forecasting. It was just pre-material boom and construction cost escalation. But we're sitting there hovering at 50 to 55 million. The insurance settlement will undoubtedly be less than that should we ask for a buyout. And I think we're all aware that that again, their coverage is to rehabilitate the building. Should we desire, they'll be in it with us. And we think that's, let's call it, 36 to $40 million project.
I think, Don, it would be good to say here that everyone acknowledges that the building could be rehabilitated.
Yes.
The rehabilitation cost look like they could be 70 to 80% of the new cost.
Correct.
Which is where this conversation comes.
So the rehabilitation in general makes a structurally upgraded, safer building. Its interior arrangement is virtually identical to Westlake as it is today. The exterior is virtually identical to the exterior as it is today. If we wanted to do some upgrades, if we wanted new AV in a rehab scenario, we would pay for any AV upgrades to the school. If we wanted to upgrade any air conditioning, we would pay for that. The school doesn't have fire sprinklers right now. If we wanted to add that, we would pay for that. So there's the basic rehabilitation and safety improvement, and then anything above that is on Granite School District's dime.
You estimated cost for those upgrades?
Some. So for example, a fire sprinkling system will most likely be $750,000. So let's say between $700,000 and $800,000. Your AV package, if you want to put the latest and greatest in classroom technology, you could put $250,000 into it without even blinking. You could put $500,000 into air conditioning. So they're not small costs. They add up quickly.
Remind me, is the roof relatively intact, or is that going to be part of the?
The roofing is part of the structural upgrade. So you would rip off the roof and you do a lot of tie-ins with steel and things of that nature. You put a whole new bunch of sheathing that's very stiff and adds shear strength and et cetera. So the roofing is part of that structural upgrade.
And that's paid for by insurance?
That would be
because
paid
it's
for.
structural.
That is correct. Mhm.
Can you speak to the rehab of Westlake versus the rebuild of Westlake,
Mhm.
and the amount of years we'd get off of a repaired Westlake versus a new Westlake? What are those? Are we getting? Is there a big difference? Obviously, a new one we'd get a lot of years, but I'm trying to look at the repaired Westlake. What's our forecast for that? Do you see what I'm getting at?
I do see what you're getting at. I think I'd answer it in two ways. There's the what's the physical structure capable of lasting, and then there's the discussion of what's the educational environment life cycle. I think those are two different things. I would say that the physical structure, once you do some of these things, you'll buy. If it's just the rehab without any of the mechanical or electrical upgrades that you might elect to do, you will not need to make a big capital investment until the air conditioning system, and that's sooner rather than later. It's about 5 or 6 years from now that we expect to see some mechanical needs at the school. So you'll get easily 20 years down the road on the structure with little concern, but all of the parts that are in the building, your boilers, your air conditioning, your plumbing, we're going to have to pay close attention to those no matter what, because those are end of their current life cycle, and the rehabilitation does not really impact those in a positive way.
But what if we chose to do those? Then what would it look like?
You'd get another. You'd probably get the insides of the buildings down the road another 20 years. So you'd probably be buying 20 years should you decide to make those large investments.
And then you match the guts to the skeleton.
Yeah, you're trying to do your darndest to match the guts to the skeleton.
You have 20 years this way, 20 years that way.
Right. Mm-hmm. And again, if we were to do all of those upgrades, the analysis that I'm doing quickly in my mind tells me, well, you're almost at just adding that cost and building a new building. Because the educational qualities of a new building are substantially different. Be it the arrangements of rooms, but for COVID, collaboration and those wonderful things between staff and students and things of that nature, the amount of natural light that you're putting into it, the health of air circulation and things of that nature. I can't match, even in a remodeled Westlake, what a new building could do. And a new building is a good 40-year life cycle before substantial reinvestment, and a structural lifespan of probably 60 years before the structure itself would start to outdate.
So is there going to be a point in the near future where you come with numbers on, okay, this is what, I guess, when are you needing a decision or a direction perhaps on this rehab versus rebuild? Because I think for the board, it would be helpful to see those more specific numbers on this is what a rehab looks with upgrades. This is what a rehab looks, without upgrades. This is what a rebuild looks. Do you see?
I do, and the real, if I might, the real question that we were presented last time was, hey, if the board wants to consider a rebuild, is there a financial pathway forward? And there is a financial pathway forward to do that bridge funding. And so in this case, the bridge funding could be, we've had a municipal building authority in place, and we have used it for extraordinary or unknown costs. And one of those is a great example. You're sitting in it. There was an opportunity to buy the GEC property and rehabilitate it at pennies on the dollar, which the board back then did, and they used the MBA to do that financing. That is a great existing vehicle should you want to do the bridge financing. And again, call it 10 or 15 million.
So what you're saying is if we went that way with an MBA bond, whatever, it would not alter the schedule of other building projects.
That's correct. We could finance that through our existing revenues. We'll explore it more, but we could do that. And the MBA is really set and operates well for unforeseen events.
Which obviously an earthquake qualifies for. We wouldn't have any.
It is the ultimate unforeseen event.
Yeah, so we wouldn't have any problem if we chose this direction. We definitely qualify for it. There's no
financially and legally, no one would argue the point.
So you say though on there it says payback from capital fund, but yet you're saying that it won't affect the other things. So
because it's our existing capital revenue.
So we're not counting in the other slides that you showed us. Was that existing capital revenue not included in that capital revenue?
That is correct. The existing capital revenue that we use to maintain buildings today is not shown on that sheet. That's reserved for really what we're doing out there today.
And is that enough? Are we going to be taking away? Is there enough in there to still maintain our other buildings as well as this? You feel like that's
we'll do okay. Yeah, if we're looking to fund
as a real strategic matter, we'd probably structure a loan where we'd make low payments on the front end and then a balloon payment on the back end right about the same time that the money starts to jump as we shift it over.
Right. Yeah.
So
as we finish the high schools, we'd look for the ability to balloon payment out.
So where, I think we asked you this, and I don't know if you were able to find it, I'm sorry, but where is it that Westlake falls right now, currently?
It's in phase 2. It's roughly 20 years out.
Okay.
So, okay, let me wrap my mind around this. So if we use the MBA pathway, basically, this municipal building authority, it would be a $10 to $15 million bond, essentially making up the difference. We'd go to our insurance company and say, you know what, we're going to rebuild. What's your final offer? We pocket their $36 to $40 million check, bridge the gap of that $10 to $15 million to come up. So essentially, we'd be paying $10 to $15 million for a brand new school.
Yeah,
Am I understanding that?
That's
Is
a
that
good
coming
summary.
full circle?
that is a good summary.
Without delaying the other bond projects, because it's a completely separate pot of money.
That is correct.
What would we be using that capital fund for if we did not do that? If we just did the rehab?
We would be, well, right now, we're looking at, miscellaneous capital improvement projects. Maybe it's resurfacing a track, it's putting a new roof on something. We would just use maintenance funds to get us over those tight times for the next 4 or 5 years. We've looked at it and it, we can do it. It's a stretch. The board, the staff's position would be having us stretch, be tight, and do more repairs is worth the net gain of a new junior high in the portfolio. It helps us out in the long term. So it's tighten your belt short term, make things work, long-term investment, a new junior high, yep, that really helps us out.
But if
Because we if I might,
Go ahead.
for example, we've put millions of dollars into Westlake over the past 5 years just in roofing upgrades and fixing of this, of that, and the other. It's one of those schools that you're constantly paying attention to, and we're not getting ahead of it. And so we see, oh, hey, you know what? This is not a bad idea to avoid in 5 years a new air conditioning system at a big capital outlay price, or. We see it as a wise investment because we're looking at some fairly large dollars to help upgrade the mechanical system alone.
So okay, if we do the MBA pathway and we have that $10 to $15 million capital money, it has to be spent on Westlake. There's no wiggle room that money can come out and just pay for other capital projects.
When you go, think of a bond as a mortgage, right, on your house. When you go to the lending institution, you're pretty much telling them, I want a mortgage on this school.
Okay.
It's an asset that, just like a house, theoretically, it's an asset that has value that you're securing the loan. It's not like a bank, and with our credit and with our ability to repay, the bank's not going to come and repossess a school, right? But in simple terms, that asset is helping to collateralize that mortgage.
Right, and I guess my point is that bond money would have to go to Westlake. We couldn't just direct it some other path.
Right, it's highly inadvisable to go spend it in small projects throughout the district. You're really designate a project, do the project with that loan that you're getting. And whatever project that is, you put it into that single capital project.
Do we need to notify the public? Do we have to have a public hearing for this?
No.
Okay.
So, but I think we better let the public know that we're somehow.
The municipal building authority, which is the Board of Education, would need to meet in a public meeting, and you post and hold an MBA meeting, and then you act or you don't act.
Yeah, I guess I meant you don't have to do a bond election process to use the MBA.
Right.
It's a traditional board action.
Do we have to let the public make comment?
No differently than you do it's not a hearing.
Okay.
No differently than you would in a regular board meeting.
Okay. Because I think if we're going to do that, we need to be very upfront.
Oh, absolutely.
And because we're moving all these projects back on our other bond issuance because of increased costs. We need to make sure that we're. And how close are you honestly on the $50 to $55 million cost for a new building? Because when we get into these new buildings,
Yeah.
I always see you asking for an amendment or increased cost because we got in and we dug this up and that up. Is that
So
50 to 55 million, or we're not going to exceed that?
So we've taken, and our best presumption is by looking at a West Jordan Junior rebuild. And in 2017, they bid that project out for just around 40 million. We've asked the designer of that, the architects who kept track of the construction cost, to escalate that out. And they came back and said, well, you guys are looking at today dollars, 2020 dollars of 46, 47 million. And I said, good to know. I'm going to think 2021 dollars and the magic factor of the unknown. And that's why I've given you the 50 to 55 million, because I've taken their escalated numbers from the most recent comparable project, both rebuilding on site and frankly in square footage. Those two buildings, Westlake versus West Jordan, are less than 2,500 square feet apart, I believe. So from a size comparison, we tried to find the most recent, most similar, and then we escalated it because we're always surprised on bid day. Again, I've tried to be conservative. If we go down this route, before any of the MBA issues are finalized, we'll have had consultants in really churning through those numbers and giving us the most current estimates that they could have. I mean, this is some consultant time and some staff time to come up with this. If we got serious about this and the board wanted to consider it, I would have cost estimators really pour over numbers to make sure that we're not giving any erroneous assumptions at the time the board wishes to execute on something.
So are we talking about a design that's already there? Are we going to let the public, how much is letting the public be involved in in Skyline and Cypress increase the costs? Would you estimate?
Substantial.
What's that?
It can be substantial.
So this 50 to 55 million is an existing design?
I think that you would look at some of your surrounding districts and see what they have designed and constructed over the past few years, and see if there's a model that works well for you and the education that you wish to deliver. I think that's a great starting point. I would also suggest that time is of the essence. We have a relocated school at Westbrook right now, an elementary school with a bunch of temporary facilities. We would like to limit the attendance at that site to 2 to 2.5 years. It's a hard challenge to design a from scratch building and build it in that time frame. So part of it is just thinking about how long you want to have students at a relocated site as well. And you know, Dr. Howe and I have talked an awful lot about, hey, I can do this for 2 years. I can do this for 2 years. I can't do it for 4. I said, could you do it for 2.5? And he just kind of looks at me, and I think I saw more gray hairs pop out. And Tyler is amazing. He said, hey, if you come, yeah, it could be. He comes back to me and he says, yeah, you know, I mean, we would like to limit relocation as much as possible because it really is a challenge on that faculty to deliver the best work they can for our students in that relocated facility. As good as it is, as quickly as we did it, it's not a junior high school.
No.
And so I'm not trying to sidestep your issue, but that's one of my main concerns is how quickly can I get these kiddos back in? And we think that a new build with an existing floor plan is about the same time frame as a comprehensive rehabilitation to do all of the structure. They seem to be tracking very closely within months of each other, a few months of each other.
Well, something you said kind of concerned me, Don, and that is and I know we want public input as much as we can.
Yeah.
But I think we're at a point where we really, especially going forward with some of our new rebuilds and that, allowing the communities to have a lot of input, it sounds like it's cost us substantial amount of money
It
in
can.
the design.
And time.
And time.
And time.
And time, money and time. If we're going to go with this and say we're going to go with an existing plan, we need to be willing to do that in the future for all buildings.
This board has approved an elementary school design
Yeah.
that we use when we rebuild elementaries. We've not done that with the junior high, and we opted to not do that with the high schools because the high schools are so community permeated. And there have been significant increases in costs, I believe, as we've done that with the high schools.
Because there's going to be some people, if we're just going with existing Westlake community, I know people are going to say, why aren't we having an opportunity for input? Which I'm willing to work with, but we need to make sure we know where we're going and we don't flip-flop. Just letting one.
At the same time, I think a lot of the Westlake families would be absolutely over the moon to hear we're rebuilding instead of rehabbing.
Oh, I don't doubt that, but you're going to have some of that talk. I think we need to be prepared.
I think a high school though also has so many, like, a swimming pool, a tennis courts, they have so many more moving
Well, no,
parts
There's
than a junior high.
reasons we did with the high schools what we did, and
Yeah.
that's okay,
But the substantial cost is a little bit of a concern.
Yeah.
That we've maybe allowed to happen, that we need to make sure we're really talking about in the future.
So Don, Connie Burgess just texted me a question.
Oh, yes, Connie. Hi, Connie in the distance.
Connie's out there. Connie, do you want to just ask the question?
Oh, yeah, I just am wondering, if we decide to rebuild, will that affect the decision of the insurance company? Okay, you rebuild, we're not going to give you X number of dollars.
It's part of the calculation that insurance companies are already doing, right? In our discussions, they're already, well, two things. Insurance companies are created to collect money, not to pay out money. So they're miserly with their funds. They're also statisticians to the core. So they've run scenario after scenario and they know an upper level. And so it's really the gamble of, do they think their cost estimates are absolutely accurate today? Certainly not. They already know that they're in it for, the mid to high 30s. The real question is, do they feel super confident that they're not in it for over 40 or 45 or whatever their number is? So it's up to us to negotiate as tough as we can to get as much as we can.
Okay, that's important. Thank you.
I just have a couple. Really low interest rates right now would be an advantage for doing a bond. Last week it was like, build this junior high, and I got home and I thought, just let him rebuild it. And it's like, I'm waffling right now on
it's hard.
Where would the $1 million to do the AV and the sprinkling system, where would that come from, and how would it affect the building?
It would come directly out of capital, similar to the repayments for an MBA-based bond. The money source is always the same.
Don, let me try and explain something, because I'm hearing the question in my own mind, and I think I've got the answer. So we do have a substantial capital budget, but we spend that every year. That's for building upgrades and improvements, and we spend that every year.
Yes.
We've also got a bond account, revenue and bonds, and we're spending those bonds. Now, the intent over time is to have those two merge and become one in the capital account, so that the capital account, instead of funding upgrades over time as the bond revenues, not the bond revenues, the debt service revenues become capital revenues, that there will be enough there to do this pay-as-you-go, the whole package.
Right.
Not just a piece of it.
Right.
So the regular, you keep talking the regular capital budget, and then we also talk about moving debt service into capital. Those are those are the same things 5 years from now.
They are.
But right now, they're separate things.
Yeah.
But the current capital budget that we use for upgrades, that's what we would use in a couple of years to do the sprinkler system, or we would use that for this. And if it's not at Westlake, then it's the next school down the street. That's the one, we use that budget to deal with the highest needs in our 100 facilities every year, and we spend all of that money every year. But if we can adjust that, tighten our belt in this area or in that area, and spend a piece of that perhaps to be paying off a municipal bond, an MBA bond, is I think what I'm hearing you say.
That's right. It's interesting. I mean, we always talk, oh, hey, which pocket or which checking account is it coming out of? You could think of debt service as maybe the left pocket, and I'm gonna get really old school on this one. The right pocket is your capital pocket, and your capital pocket also has that little Levi's 501 jeans additional pocket there, right?
Coins.
So I think the existing maintenance is kind of that little coin pocket, right? And then as you're taking money out of debt service levy into capital, that'll become your big right pocket.
Okay.
So I in my mind, I have three oddly distinct things, because no matter what we do, that existing capital has to fund existing schools.
There are three
we try not to touch it.
in your mind, but they all have the same name. So when we keep hearing there's always the same
and
thing.
I'm sorry, it's that daily drone of you do it every day, you don't think to articulate it.
So one more quick question. If we decided just to let the insurance company pay for fixing it up, I mean, there's a lot of things at Westlake that would be new.
Sure.
So what is reasonable for us to look at as far as how soon would we start just doing the fixing versus building a new school?
Sure. So if we decided we were just going to rehabilitate the building, we would need to bring an architecture team on board. So we'd work with the insurance company, hire a design team. They would need 4 or 5 months or so to get the remodel rehabilitation plans together. And we would bid that in mid to late spring of 2021. And we would spend a couple of years, 18 to 24 months pushing hard to get the project done. That's the same, frankly, if we decided that we would want to.
You mentioned earlier that it was, I mean, when you put it, the rebuild versus the rehab, I mean, it's coming within months of each other as far as date of completion. Is that?
Very much so, yeah. Again, presuming, my presumed condition was if we found an existing plan. It only, if you said, hey, start from scratch, my design team would work for 9+ months on a new building. If you just find something you like, then they work a little on the site and tweak a this, that, or the other, and it comes together within that 4 or 5 month period that we just spoke of on a rehabilitation design.
So this has been helpful, because honestly, when I came in tonight, I was thinking when we got to this slide that it was going to be a question of, do you rebuild Westlake at the expense of all these other, our future, our GSD future bond?
Yeah.
Is that at the expense of this? But it sounds to me like we do have an avenue, separate funding to make the rebuild happen without affecting the order of phase 1.
We have a separate finance tool that we have historically used to deal with one-off or emergency kinds of situations.
Okay, so I think this has been helpful to me to understand that.
Oh, go ahead.
No, I think my question was just, it's kind of been answered a little bit, was the time frame to, if we decide to go with the rebuild, would we get a settlement from the insurance and then you would do the MBA? So then you'd know the difference we would need for or how does that work?
I'd want to work a little bit more closely with Dale and Mitch to figure out, I think you'd do an insurance settlement, you'd do a design. You probably wouldn't want to bid before you had your bond sold. I think you'd sell a bond and then you'd bid, but I think they'd be very, very close to each other. I think you'd want a design and cost estimates, and then you put your bid out. And again, I mean, I really would have to rely heavily on these cost estimators because again, I mean, we've done some foundational work. We've given a conservative cushion there on what we're telling you tonight. But until you get those until you select a plan, cost estimate, we're gonna be very cautious. And it's not to sidestep, it's going to say, we don't know what we don't know. So we will use some discussion language that, hey, I have to find out. I feel like we're in a ballpark, but I have to research. It's all about that data collection.
Okay. Sorry, just one more question.
Yeah.
So the security upgrades that we're doing every year, does that come out of our existing capital budget? And so because I don't want to ever take some of those away.
So that exactly. So part of the machinations and why we hemmed and hawed and we, took out some calculators. We kind of set it internally as this do not cross line, that we don't want to slow down those security rollouts. And what we've spoken to tonight, we feel that we're not going to slow down those high importance projects, right? Those top tier priority ones won't be slowed by the conversations that we've had tonight. That's super important. And so it honestly, Stacy asked for my presentation sometime Tuesday or Wednesday, and I chuckled. And I said, oh, Friday, Saturday, by the time we get together as a team and collaborate and talk about how these cash flows may or may not be impacted. So we spent a lot of time with those goals in mind.
I think Terry brings up some really good points as far as transparency with our public, and it's not just the Westlake public, but I think that there's going to be a lot of people that hear, if we choose to go the direction of a rebuild, they're going to hear we're building Westlake, and they're going to automatically associate the 5 to 7 year delay with the rebuild, blaming it on Westlake, basically. And so I think we will need a lot of transparency and a lot of communication going out to.
And you notice I'm staring right at the communications director for his thoughts.
I know, Ben's chomping at the bit. I can tell. It's a good point because, we need our communities and our families and even our faculties and staffs to understand that they are two separate funding mechanisms and one is not affecting the other.
No, point well taken.
Agreed.
I just want to say, that the communication and transparency of us just saying, hey, this is exactly how it's rolling.
I think we can put together, once we have an idea what direction the board is settled on, as he's developing his numbers, we would develop a communications plan to roll that type of information out. And I would like to coincide it with an update on the 40-year strategic plan so people understand that is still progressing.
How soon do we have to decide? Is this something we have to decide tonight or?
Oh, no.
Okay.
No. Soon.
When is
Call
this?
Tyler and ask him.
Yeah.
Right?
When is this coming back?
Tyler,
I was hoping for after December, and you know what that means.
Tyler Howe just sent a text message and he said March 19th of 2020 would have been great.
The action step continues to be negotiations with the insurance company.
Yeah.
But I think this will probably come to a head, Don, next 4 or 5 months.
Oh, I hope it comes to a head before then.
But not 3 weeks. See, now Don and I are negotiating. You see this?
To me,
Will I be here?
I will say, Connie, that was an unexpected question. I haven't put enough thought into it to give you an accurate answer. I think we would need to strategize as a team to understand the pathway forward because there are interim steps. What could an insurance settlement be? Could we resolve that before Thanksgiving? Yeah, sure. We could. But then it's all about that bridge finance and about the plan that you select and about that cost estimating. And that definitely, to the superintendent's point, that's months. How all of those estimates and selections come together, that's not a, before the winter break kind of discussion. It's in process by then, but I certainly think that we'd have some, and then what's the communications plan? How does that all work? Yeah.
Several months, not many months, not 6 months, but several.
Any other questions? There's good discussion tonight, guys. Any further comment, questions?
One slide equaled 45 minutes.
There you go. That's okay. It's 6:30. I'm pretty happy about that. All right.
Lots of great questions, and we expect more to filter in.
Yeah.
Very, very
well. Thanks for all your hard work. I know, as if COVID weren't enough for your team to have the buildings clean and supplied and ready to go, you add an earthquake in on top of that, and I know you guys have been busy.
Okay, sorry.
Yes.
Just for my information, as people ask about this, what is in our general capital outlay fund, how much do we have every year in the estimate?
Sure. Roughly 23 goes into the fund, but by the time you take, this is the complex bit, by the time you take the educational and technology money out of it, and you take maintenance M&O out of it, et cetera, it dwindles pretty quick. We're probably pre-committed most years down to single-digit millions, let's call it maybe 8 million. And, once we get through security upgrades, we're spending millions a year on security upgrades. So I really tell my team we have about $3 million per year to consider various projects throughout the district that we already haven't set as priority one we're going to do.
So it's that about that 3 million is what we're looking at as far as our flexibility. We only got about 3 million.
Yeah, it ebbs and it flows, and Mitch Robinson and I work and try and track it and work with it, but it's something that I think we can handle.
Okay. I'm just voicing it because I think Karen put it that, we're going to have people ask the question, well, why are we putting off a rebuild of an overcrowded school when we have, and I want to be able to say, look, we've only got 3 million here. That's not going to.
And really, for a district of our size, the capital budget for these upgrades is small. I know that when people hear the number 23 million, oh my goodness, it goes very quick. And even technology alone, you're spending 5 million a year kind of stuff. And so, you have 100 facilities. We have roughly 11 million square feet of building. It goes. Yeah. Okay. Lots to do.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks, Don.
Thank you so much.
Thank
I
you.
appreciate all your time and great questions.
Hey.
Have anything to report?
Oh, it says superintendent's report, but he has nothing to report. So with that, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
A motion to adjourn.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye. Aye.
Thank you
All right.
all.
Thank you.
I think we set a record. Thanks.